Human Ascension Registry. Archive Entry Number 0. Encrypted transmission for the future belt colonies and beyond. There was an era, lost in the mists of geological time, in which our species was fragile. A biological anomaly confined to a single biosphere, subject to the climatic whims of a main-sequence G-class star. To any external intelligence observing us from the void, we were a paradox, beings with the capacity to calculate the trajectory of comets and unravel the secrets of the atom, yet physically trapped in a gravity well from which escape seemed impossible. For 100,000 years, we stared at the night sky with a mixture of terror and adoration. The stars were not destinations, they were the campfires of indifferent gods or holes in a cloak of eternal blackness that devoured all light. We were shackled to the earth by an invisible force, a fundamental law that shaped our bones, dictated our strength, and limited our ambition: gravity. That force was our mother, and also our jailer, but within our genetic code pulsed an error or, perhaps, a hidden design instruction. Unlike other species that perfected the art of survival in their immediate environment, we began to dream of abandoning it. It was not enough for us to master fire in caves to protect ourselves from the cold, we wanted to understand the fire that burned in the firmament. This is not just the story of how we built machines of metal and chemical fluids. It is the chronicle of the moment humanity decided to break its biological chrysalis to become a vector of cosmic expansion. The first leap was not physical. It was a leap of consciousness that defied millennia of stagnation. Before particle physics or ionic propulsion existed, there was the geometry of shadows. The ancient architects of Mesopotamia, the pyramid builders of Egypt, and the stargazers in the jungles of the Yucatan were already traveling in spirit. By aligning their temples with the constellations, they were claiming their place in the cosmos. They were sending a message to the void: we see you. We know you are there. And we are coming. However, the human body is stubborn and fragile. We are made of water, carbon, and calcium, designed with surgical precision for specific atmospheric pressures and extremely narrow thermal ranges. Space, on the contrary, is the realm of absolute nothingness. It is a vacuum that boils the blood, expands the lungs, and freezes the breath in fractions of a second. To conquer it, we needed more than simple curiosity. We needed a technological rebellion against our own biological nature. The Industrial Revolution gave us our first steel muscle. We learned to domesticate steam and then the invisible energy of electricity. But the sky remained an impassable wall, a frontier reserved for myths. The first aviators who took off from the ground were considered visionaries or lunatics, and history tells us they were probably both. But they only brushed the outer edge of the atmosphere. The real challenge was not simply to fly, it was to fall upward with such speed and fury that the earth could never reclaim you again. Here is where science fiction intertwines with the purest reality. Mathematical minds understood the rocket equation long before the first engine was ever cast in a forge. They understood that the earth is the cradle of humanity, but they also accepted that one cannot live in the cradle forever. That idea was not a simple slogan, it was a decree of voluntary exile into the unknown. They understood Newton's third law not as a physical limitation, but as a master key: to move toward infinity, we must be willing to leave a massive part of ourselves behind. The definitive phase shift occurred in the 20th century, in the crucible of war and the competition for supremacy. It was a strange and contradictory era where human ingenuity reached peaks of genius funded by the desire for mutual annihilation. The rocket, originally designed to cross continents for destructive purposes, became the genetic ancestor of all exploration vehicles. A machine that did not depend on air to breathe or to propel itself. An engine that worked in the absolute vacuum, defying the logic of everything that biology had taught us about movement. Imagine the thunder of the first launches in the steppes and deserts. It was not just mechanical noise, it was the sound of the laws of physics being bent by pure will. When the first artificial satellite entered orbit, the electronic pulse it emitted was the first heartbeat of a synthetic human heart in space. It was the sound of planetary quarantine being violated for the first time in the history of life. That small metallic object triggered an era of titans. The engines grew to dimensions that defied architecture itself. Metal towers over 100 meters high contained at their base the concentrated fury of a solar storm. At the moment of liftoff, the energy released was so massive that the ground shook miles away and the light eclipsed the sun itself. We were not traveling elegantly toward the stars, we were storming the heavens, forcing our way into the temple of the cosmos through brute force and an unshakable faith in numbers. Every astronaut who sat atop those energy reservoirs knew they were riding a controlled explosion. They were the new Argonauts, navigating through a sea of radiation and silence. We reached the moon in a moment of global pause. For an instant, time stood still for billions of people watching a grainy and ghostly radio signal. Two human beings walked on a world that had not known life in billions of years. At that moment, humanity ceased to be a purely terrestrial species to become a multi-planetary species. It was our first claim on the territory of the eternal. But the most important thing we found on the moon was not the dust or the ancient rocks. It was the perspective of the mirror. Looking back and seeing the Earth rising over the lunar horizon, we understood our true existential situation. We saw a pale blue dot, a mote of dust suspended in a vast sunbeam. We saw an organic spaceship, beautiful and terrifyingly isolated in the absolute blackness. There were no political borders visible from there, only a thin and delicate layer of atmosphere that protected everything we ever loved from the absolute cold of the universe. After the initial euphoria came the phase of persistence. We learned that space was not just about reaching goals and planting flags, but about learning to inhabit the void. We built permanent laboratories that circle the planet at speeds that defy human perception. There, in the constant freefall of microgravity, we discovered the limits and adaptations of our own flesh. Without the constant weight of the world, our bodies begin to transform. Muscles atrophy, bones change their structure, and body fluids seek new balances. Space tries to dismantle the human form, atom by atom. We had to redesign our own daily existence, inventing life support systems that recycle every drop of water and every molecule of oxygen. We became the first practical cyborgs. Today, we stand on the threshold of the second space age. We are no longer driven solely by competition between nations, but by a vision of commercial, scientific, and existential destiny. Mars is no longer a wandering red dot in the firmament, it is the canvas where we are beginning to paint the next chapter of our evolution. We are designing ships that use the pressure of sunlight to sail and plasma engines that could turn the solar system into our backyard. The colonization of other worlds will not simply be an exercise in engineering. It will be the birth of a new branch of humanity. Imagine the generations that will be born under skies of different colors, where gravity is only a fraction of Earth's and the horizon always shows an alien landscape. Those humans will not feel exiled from Earth. For them, our planet will be a legend from the archives, a world of impossible oceans and white clouds. Biological and cultural divergence is the necessary price for the immortality of our species. We are entering the era of terraforming, a process in which we will rewrite the geology and the atmosphere of entire planets. It is the ultimate act of ambition, but also of necessity. If we want the flame of human consciousness to survive the cycles of planetary destruction, we must scatter among the stars. We must become the gardeners of the solar system, and the guardians of life on worlds that are sterile today. Beyond Mars, the icy moons of the gas giants await us. Hidden oceans under miles of icy shell where life could be evolving in forms that our science cannot yet categorize. And beyond our system, our interstellar probes are already traveling toward other suns, carrying the DNA of our history. We are not the same beings who trembled at the darkness of the night in caves. We have tamed the energy of the atom, we have learned to edit the very code of life, and we have broken the physical chains that bound us to our home world. Space travel is not a luxury, nor a whim of adventurers, it is our biological imperative. It is the final answer to the question of who we are and what place we occupy in the fabric of the reality. The universe is vast, ancient, and for the most part, silent. But in a small corner of a spiral galaxy, a species decided that silence was not an acceptable option. We decided to fill that vacuum with our stories, our questions, and our physical presence. The Earth is our cradle, the blessed place where we learn to dream and to look up. But the infinite is our true home. The first leap was the hardest, the one that required the most sacrifice and a blind faith in what we could achieve. But now, the gates of the cosmos are wide open. The horizon is no longer a line that limits our vision on the ground, it is an infinite sphere of stars surrounding us in every possible direction. We are destined to be the sowers of life, the navigators of the void, and the architects of new realities. The journey has only just begun, and as long as there is a mind that wonders what lies beyond, humanity will continue to move toward the eternal light of the final frontier. End of transmission. The future awaits us among the shadows of the new suns.